The Story of a Noble Writer, a short story by Vahid Sajadafar.
In the historic heart of Shiraz, a city deeply rooted in poetry and love, lived a writer named Kian. With a captivating pen and a sensitive soul, Kian wrote his stories from the heart of his community. He delved into the depths of people's pain and suffering, reflecting these struggles in his writings. Love, pain, and hope flowed through his words, as if each sentence he wrote was a drop of the people's tears. Kian's writings often brought him into conflict with the authorities. The words he inscribed with his pen struck like a dagger at the hearts of the corrupted governors. Despite being banned from publishing his works, this did not extinguish the flame of hope within him. Though he could no longer officially publish his writings, he knew deep down that he had to continue writing, to be the voice for the voiceless. One night, Kian pondered the idea of emigration. Should he leave his homeland and continue writing elsewhere? Could he live far from his birthplace, away from the streets of Shiraz, where every corner held a memory? He wanted to leave, but every time he considered it, the faces of his people, their pains, and their hopes swirled in his mind. After many sleepless nights, Kian decided to stay. He couldn't separate himself from his people. He couldn't witness their suffering and remain a mere observer. His pen was his only weapon, and he intended to use it until his last breath. Despite all the threats and challenges, Kian never stopped writing. His stories, though not officially published, were circulated secretly among the people and on social media. One night, while Kian was writing, a knock on the door startled him. Men with cold, soulless faces had come for him. They interrogated and threatened him, but Kian, with courage and determination, told them he would never put down his pen. He told them that as long as there was pain among the people, he would continue to write, even if he were the only one reading his work. Over the years, Kian became a symbol of resistance against oppression. In the dark shadows of the night, in his small and humble home, he continued to write. His handwritten works were shared among the people of Shiraz and beyond. Each line he wrote was like water on the fire of tyranny, rekindling hope in despairing hearts. One of these nights, Kian was awakened by a faint sound. An elderly woman, her face bearing the marks of years of hardship and pain, stood at his door. Her eyes glistened with tears, and in her trembling hands, she held out a small notebook. "These are your writings, Kian. These words give us life, they give us hope. We ask you to continue, we need you." Kian took the notebook with respect and looked into the woman's eyes. He felt that every word he had written, every sentence he had put on paper, had become a light in the hearts of the people. From that day on, he wrote more than ever. Every story he wrote spoke of the pain and concerns of his people, and of a love that could not be extinguished even in the hardest of times. Over time, Kian's writing sparked a large movement. People from all over Iran came to Shiraz to meet him. They shared their stories with him, and with a heartful pen, he brought them to life on paper. Kian had become the voice of a nation, a voice that could not be silenced. One autumn day, as golden leaves danced in the streets of Shiraz, Kian received an invitation from abroad. He was invited to a literary event where he could speak freely and read his works without censorship. For a moment, he thought this could be an opportunity to make his people's voice heard in the world, but his heart could not part from Shiraz. He couldn't leave his people, couldn't be away from where his roots were. Kian decided once again to stay in Shiraz. He watched the event from afar, tears of joy in his eyes, listening to speeches about his works. He knew that even though he couldn't attend the event, his words had crossed borders and touched countless hearts. Years passed, and Kian continued to write. Amidst hardships and challenges, he poured hope and love into his words. His writings continued to circulate among the people, and everyone who read them felt a piece of Kian's soul within them. In the twilight of Kian's life, his home had become a sacred place for writers and freedom lovers. Men and women from all over Iran came to visit him, to speak with him and learn from his experiences. Every day in his small, book-filled home, new stories of pain, suffering, love, and hope were narrated. One day, a young girl named Mathab came to Kian's house. Her eyes were full of enthusiasm and dreams, but there was also a shadow of despair deep within them. She showed Kian an old book and said, "My mother gave me your book. She was an avid supporter of yours. Your stories were a light in the darkness of her life. Now, I want to continue her path and serve my people with my pen, but sometimes, I feel that writing is futile. Did you ever feel this way?" Kian looked at Mathab with a warm and kind smile and said, "Dear Mathab, writing is never futile. Every word that comes from the heart touches another heart and can create change. I always believed that even if just one person reads my writings and is inspired by them, my work has been fruitful. It doesn't matter how many people read your writings, what matters is that you write with love and faith." Encouraged by these words, Mathab decided to continue writing. That very night, she sat in Kian's house and wrote her first story, a tale of love and hope amidst the darkness. When Kian read Mathab's story, tears welled up in his eyes, and he told her, "You will carry on my path. Your pen will be the voice of a new generation." Over time, Mathab became one of Iran's most prominent writers. Her stories, like Kian's, were passed from hand to hand among the people and inspired many. She never forgot Kian's support and wise words and always remembered that love for the people and writing from the heart were the most important things for a realist writer. In Kian's final days, Mathab and many of his friends and admirers gathered around him. They knew Kian was nearing the end of his journey, but he looked at life with a peaceful and satisfied gaze. Surrounded by his friends, with his pen in hand, Kian gently closed his eyes and passed away with a smile on his lips. After Kian's death, his small, book-filled house became a museum for fighters for justice. A museum that housed not only Kian's stories, but also the stories of those he had influenced. People from all over Iran came to see Kian's mementos and be inspired by his history of struggles. Mathab, as the guardian of this legacy, continued to write and held weekly gatherings in Kian's old house, where young writers would come together to read their works and share their experiences. She also worked to publish Kian's last works so that his voice would remain alive and reach more ears. It was intriguing that even after his death, publishing Kian's works was not easy. Many harbored resentments towards him, and even after his passing, they refused to grant permission for his works to be published. In one of these weekly gatherings, a young man named Saman, full of excitement, joined the group and shared a story about his life with Mathab. Saman had come from a poor family in a remote village and had been encouraged by reading Kian's works to come to the city and become a writer. His story was filled with pain and suffering, but also with hope and resilience. Mathab, after reading Saman's story, thought of Kian and told him, "If Kian were alive, he would be proud of you. You can carry on his path and create change with your pen." Over the years, Mathab and Saman became close friends and continued to fight for freedom and justice together. They succeeded in widely publishing Kian's works and even translating some of them into other languages. Kian's words were now known and inspiring not only in Iran but around the world. On a spring day, when the blossoms of orange trees danced through the streets of Shiraz, Mathab and Saman decided to host a grand celebration. They invited writers, poets, and artists from all over the country to honor and remember Kian's legacy. The celebration was incredibly successful. People from every corner of Iran traveled to Shiraz to participate in the event. That night, the air was filled with the sounds of poetry and music, and the stories of Kian and those inspired by him resonated with everyone present. Mathab, with tears in her eyes and joy in her heart, watched the gathering, knowing that Kian's legacy was alive and would endure. As the night ended, with stars glittering in the sky and a cool breeze sweeping through the streets, Mathab and Saman stood side by side. Mathab looked up at the sky and said with a smile, "Kian has never left us. He lives on in our words, in our stories, and in our hearts." Saman nodded and gently replied, "Yes, he is always with us. And we must continue his path until justice and freedom become a reality." Thus, the story of Kian, a writer from Shiraz, did not end but continued to live on in the hearts of the people of Iran and beyond. Kian showed that the power of the pen and love for the people could transcend borders and time, keeping the light of hope alive even in the darkest times. And this light remains bright in the hearts of those who continue his journey.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.